Unit 11 Participatory Method. Contents 11.1 Introduction, 11.2 Relationship with Common Sense, Interrogating Ideological Location, 11.3 The Historical Context, 11.4 Delineation of Key Features, 11.5 Conclusion. Learning Objectives. It is expected that after reading Unit 11, you will be able to locate the participatory approach to social research within the theoretical and methodological debates in the mainstream social sciences, provide the historical background of the emergence of the participatory approach, discuss the basis of participatory research methodology, compare the conventional research methodology with the participatory approach to research, describe the operational dimensions of participatory approach and the uses of participatory rural appraisal. 11.1 Introduction. Unit 11 brings you to the end of our multi-dimensional discussion on research methodologies. In some ways, we have undertaken a long route to reach this point where research becomes an all-pervasive activity to include you and me in the process of understanding the social reality. You may not fully agree with the approach and general tenor of Book 1. All the same, you would find that you got a chance to be familiar with the main currents of methodological debates in the social science. While reading Book 2 and Book 3, you may like to refer back to some of the units in Book 1. Unit 11 will also be one of those units you would like to come back to, mainly because the participatory approach has put forward a critique of value neutral research and has argued for the inclusion of the researched in the process of inquiry into the social world. It is easier for you to relate to the approach. Let us see what is participatory approach. 11.2 Relationship with Common Sense. Interrogating Ideological Location. We have already seen in our discussion on the comparative approach why and how it is important to make a distinction between common sense and social approach. Indeed, a fundamental point that marked the beginning of a social science of society was a self-conscious break with the common sense of perception of reality. The taken for granted reality was not considered a valid starting point. To use an analogy from the natural science, it means that even if people perceived that the sun did set the west and rose in the east, science could ably demonstrate that the sun did not move and earth did. This is so despite the solid fixity of the lived experience of being in the earth. To recapitulate Emile Durkheim's the rules of sociological method that social facts must be treated as things in a blunt affirmation that social phenomena belong to the realm of nature. Empirical science has to come to conquer the prejudice and illusion in human beings. Ideas about nature before social contact can be examined scientifically. The latter is an especially difficult accomplishment, for prejudice and illusion are actually part of our social life. To regard social facts as things is to perform the act of detachment necessary to recognize that society has an objective existence, independent of any particular one of us. Hence, it can be studied by methods of objective observation. For long, the idea that it was actually possible to observe and study reality from the outside and from a location that was nowhere and everywhere persisted. Even though the Marxist approach at one end and the phenomenological view at the another challenged such an idea of neutrality, the feminist approach made a more recent serious theoretical challenges to this idea. From another position, the participatory approach has also raised this issue. Before we move on to detailing both the historical context of participatory approach and its main features, I would like to draw attention to another similarity between the implications of the feminist and the participatory approach. This is the entire issue of disciplinary boundaries and their sanctity. It is widely recognized today that a relationship exists between disciplining knowledge and the rise of academic disciplines as we know it today. We also know that particular theoretical approach believes that we can draw clear domains of research, thereby break social reality into different parts like the economic, the political, the sociological to be studied by different disciplines. Such a compartmentalized approach assumes that the theoretical tools developed by the disciplines are neutral and scientific. Using them or doing normal science in such a case is educate without questioning the paradigm provided for. Both the feminist and the participatory approaches have questioned this. It is not just that there are suggestions for applying new techniques of research, but the very epistemological basis of research has been opened up to the reformulation. It may be a useful exercise at this point to dwell on how the feminist and participatory approaches move on similar paths. They both question the notion that the traditional social research was indeed value-free, universal, and objective. They believe that the term universal standpoint in a caste, class, race, gender divided world cannot be universal. In other words, the dominant view of society is represented at the universal viewpoint. They question the objective approach advocated by mainstream scholarships. They pose a challenge to conventional disciplinary boundaries and advocate an interdisciplinary approach to conventional academic scholarship. They promote the idea of an active engagement with a cause in society. For instance, the feminist approach broadly would seek to incorporate gender analysis pursuant to the finding that much of what was practiced as value neutral and objective knowledge was actually male centered. Similarly, the participatory approach too would agree that the voices and views of the marginal groups, whether based on a class or caste or gender, were not adequately taken note of. Hence, an active attempt methodology has to be undertaken to address this. From the above description of similarities between the feminist and participatory approaches, you can easily make out that while applying the approaches, we can gainfully use academic research for social change. You can see this expressed in a avowed close link between the feminist theory and the feminist movement, or in a professing a serious consciousness commitment to gender equality when researching. They believe in recognizing diversity not just in society but also in construction of social knowledge. Having looked at the similarities between the feminist and participatory approach to social research, let us now turn to the historical context within which the participatory method emerged. Before discussing the historical context, let us complete Reflections and Action 11.1. Reflections and Action 11.1. Participatory research assumes that its method makes the research a tool for development because the dialogue between the researcher and the researched in a common process of learning gives an impetus to a process of education and awareness of those involved in it. Imagine yourselves to be a part of such a research process. How would you reflect the participatory approach in the very organization of research? While identifying the needs of the target groups, whole view would you seek and why? Local opinion leaders, the people themselves, a government agency, a centrally sponsored scheme. 11.3. The historical context. The effort in this unit is to communicate that approaches to study social institutions arise in the context of a society's concerns of the times. In Unit 9, you would have noticed the academic Western context within which the comparative approach arose. You would have also noticed in Unit 10 how the feminist approach is inextricably linked to the growth of women's movement. In this sense, as we have just noticed, there is more in common between feminist and participatory approaches. To trace the history of the emergence of participatory approaches, we refer you to such an educators of adult learners as Ivan Illich and Paulo Freire from the countries of the South. They opposed the idea of schooling and put forward a pattern of alternative pedagogy. This process later crystallized as the concept of participatory research. They facilitated a parallel discourse between the teacher and the taught. This was, as Tanton said, to establish the control of the learner over his learning process. This was the basic frame of the anticipatory research. In year 1974 to 75, a group of educators of adult learners coined the term participatory research, and the international Council for Adult Education gave it a concrete shape by adopting it. In all areas, including the non-governmental organizations where research concerns the problems of social changes and development, the term has gained currency. While commenting on methodology and applications of participatory rural prices, Mukherjee wrote, a central concern of many of these agencies has been rural development, and we thus have development of the rapid rural appraisal or RRA developed as a methodology in 1970s, influenced by farming systems research (FSR) and other methods. Some of the early methods pathbreakers of such methodology were Robert Chambers, Peter Hildebrand, Robert Rhodes, and Michael Collinson, who along with others met in conferences at the Institute of Development Studies in October 1978 and December 1979. It soon spread to different parts of the world, and in the mid-80s there was a wide array of experience from the applications of RRA in different field situations. In his introduction to his book on methodology in social research, Mukherjee has traced major influences and inspiration that fed into the evolution as a concept and practice of research. One can do no better than reproduce in box 11.1 his concise account of the influence and inspirations. Box 11.1 Major influence and inspirations in the evolutions of participatory research. The sociology of knowledge, which relates ideas and ideologies espoused by social groups to the positions they occupy in the social structure. Therefore, alternative histories can be written on those struggles and voices that have not been recorded, and they can create histories, ideologies. The knowledge that may be generated by these marginalized subalterns groups can become the conditions of change and transformations in their own lives through the process of knowing, learning, and education. Action research, which was recaptured in Latin America and subsequently became the basis of participatory action research, emphasizing the notion of acting as a legitimate mode of knowing, thereby taking the realm of knowledge into the field of practice. Phenomenological thinking, which legitimated experience as a basic knowing, thereby expanding the basics of knowing beyond mere intellectual cognition. Intellectual cognition. The debate on development paradigm, which was critical of total top-down expert designed development projects and programs, and brought in the issue of people's participation, community participation of those who developed, is being attempted as central actors in their own development. The emergence of a new structure of civil society through the institutions of non-governmental organizations. Let us now turn to appreciate the key features of participatory research method that has currently found many followers in different disciplines of social sciences. 11.4 Delineation of Key Features. In sharp contrast to the idea of detachment and value neutrality propagated by the early comparative approach, the participatory approach is open and emphatic about attachment and partisanship with the marginal groups whose perceptions, they argue, have been marginalized in social science knowledge. According to Parthanath Mukherjee, participatory research methodology is based on three important conditions, which he reproduced here in his words in box number 11.2. Box number 11.2 Basis of participatory research methodology. There is a target community or group which is felt needed of changing its underdog, oppressed, marginalized, exploited situations to a more favorable one. Second, this target group, in cooperation and in conjunction with an acceptable external interventionist-oriented researcher, formulates research goals, participates in data collections, and, as far as possible, also in analysis and drawing of conclusions, which directly feed into the decision making relating to community action for change or development. The ultimate aim of the external researcher is to attempt to ensure complete ownership of knowledge, example of the health system, technology, management techniques, by the target community. Participatory research is thus a process specifically directed towards the ameliorative or transformative change or development in the conditions of life and living of the group or population who themselves are participant in the research process. Before we go into comparison of participatory research methodology with the so-called traditional or conventional research methodology, let us also gain an idea of what the concept of participation entails. The term has, of course, received different interpretations and meaning in different contexts. Let us confine ourselves to the context of social research, and in this context, you can say that participation has at least three dimensions. 1. Participation entails the involvement of all those concerned with the decision making about what and how something has to be done. Participation involves mass contributions to the efforts for the development. This implies that the involvement of all these affected in the implementations of this decision. Also, those involved in 1 and 2 share the outputs of the efforts planned and implemented for development. These ideas about participations refers to the entire socio-economic process of a society and therefore concern the researchers of social processes and change and development. There is no doubt that there exists a wide gap between the macro level goals of society and what generally happens in the name of participation. Often the participation of people in the actual work implementing a plan or program is projected as community participation. In our opinion, unless the community shares in decisions making about planning and implementation of the planning of program, we cannot name it as participation. Mere acceptance or occurrence of unpaid labor in the name of participation is the worst form of actual exploitation of labor. In this sense, you may argue for making a distinction between the participation of just a few local individuals and the organized involvement of the community as such. We need to also caution about going overhead and expecting the full autonomy of the community in controlling all activities of a plan. In real life situations, such a notions of participations may not be feasible from any angle. All the same, the idea of participations of community participation as we have developed in this paragraph is only a logical progression of the ideas but forwarded by the educators of adult learners. In this sense, participation has an intrinsic value for participants, and the researcher is also one among the participants. Most importantly, community participation ensures incorporations of indigenous knowledge and expertise into implementations of development plans. This leads to freedom from the independence on so-called professionals. Participatory research is a process aiming to bring about improvement in the conditions of living of the people who themselves participate in the research. Its byproduct is the ownership of knowledge in the hands of the people, making for sustainability of improved conditions of living. Mukherjee 2000 has presented some of the basic tenets of so-called academic, traditional, conventional research methodology as perceived by action researchers, social activities, who advance in the argument for participatory research methodology. This is because the latter is generally counterposed against the former. Box 11.3 Counterpoising conventional research against participatory research, in the words of Mukherjee 2000. The interventionist role of the subject is a prime condition of PR. The scholar is committed to bringing about social change. The ideal position that an external subject or object distance should be maintained so that the situations being studied can remain unaffected by the subject. Social scientist's role is considered untenable. It follows that in PR, there is no scope for value neutrality. It is applied towards desirable directed change and development. The top-down approach of CR, in which the researcher and his institution decides upon the focus, methodology, and the outcome of the study, and regards the people who are studied as objects who are there for the convenience of the researcher. Fernandez and Vegas 1985 has to give way to research which is viewed as a process which the people go through as a step in awareness building about the situation of the oppressed. Most CR methodologies, it is argued, originated in the West with an explicit objective to control its subjects' people. Fernandez and Vegas 1985. For, in contrast, empowerment of the marginalized through the research process is the avowed goal of PR. CR focuses on scientific rigor in the explanation and or understanding of the phenomena, which is then disseminated to the scientific community through accredited journals. It is assumed and expected that knowledge so generated sooner or later will contribute directly or indirectly to practical applications through social policy, social work, and action research PR. On the other hand, is viewed so more as a study of people, but a process which the people go through and as a step in awareness building about the situation of the oppressed, in which ideally research is with and for the people and not on them. So this is PR means participatory research, okay, and CR means conventional research. So this is the statement from Mukherjee, and we will go to this box number 11.3 shows that participatory research, that is PR, criticizes conventional research, CR, for its apparent insensitivity to the problems at the grassroots. Conventional research, on the other hand, criticizes participatory research for its lack on scientific rigor. But you would note that the participatory research does not view itself as the sole alternative to conventional research. Fernandez recognized the value of so-called conventional research both in the mobilization of the people and in projecting macro realities essential for policy arguments. According to Mukherjee, participatory research, as discussed above by Fernandez and Vegas, is a kind of tool-oriented method. We are here discussing the methods or the techniques of research. You may say that the advocating and integration of the elements of both in an example of mixing methods that are suitable for inquiring into the practical objectives of participatory plan. Mukherjee is also raised an interesting point about such macro theories of hermeneutics, post-structuralism, critical realism, which do not subscribe to the positivism, but they are equally a part of the conventional research in the sense that they have little use for mobilizing participatory research action, participatory action research. Rather, Mukherjee says the sweep and the strength of the currents that such macro theories generate in society often creates very conditions for grassroots actions to become significant and necessary. The questions come up how to design one's research to make it promote through social values which are implied in the research for increased participation. As a matter of fact, established research institutions fit into the prevailing class relations that ensure benefit to the upper and middle strata researchers only. Participatory research, on the other hand, assumes that through its method, research can itself turn into a tool for participatory development. Both the national and local power structures are by and large not conducive to accept the forces of conscientization once it comes into existence due to participatory research methods. Practitioners of participatory movements would certainly welcome research if it would help them to understand their own social identity, to become cognizant of their relationship to other social relationships affecting them, and the greater potential of shared resources at the larger than one's family level. The inclusion of questions on participations into one's research questions, selecting key issues for inquiry, the criteria for selecting the issues need to turn be participatory. Here, the most important point is to believe of the rhetoric of participation, which is almost universal in all spheres of current discourse. Here, one quick reflections and action exercise would be in order to drive the point home. Reflections and action 11.2. In an international seminar on participatory approach, a participant described in the following word his country's commitment to participation. After the detailed programs have been well planned, we tell the people exactly what to do. They will understand their responsibility to participate. Respond to these applications of the notions of participation by writing answers to the following questions. Do you perceive a sense of participation present in the above statement? Who is planning and who is taking the responsibility to participate? Should those planning and taking the responsibility to participate be very different sets of people? In advocating participatory research practices and institution is a dynamic and gradually evolving process in response to social needs and values and available skills and resources. Participatory approach cannot be either legislated or adopted in a matter of days. They generally grow over time with experience, practice, and analysis of what works as what does not work. To return to the beginning, one has to stress throughout the Unit 11 the importance of the linkages between the overall theoretical assumptions, the approach, and finally the approach field technique that follow. It is but natural that the concerns with the development with wanting to represent and incorporate the views of different sections of society would lead to a shift in the actual mode of doing field work. This participatory approach has been spelled out to imply a participatory field appraisal. I very briefly touch upon more widely used forms of the rapid rural appraisal and participatory rural appraisal. Rapid rural appraisal or RRA is a way of organizing people for collecting and analyzing information within a short time period. It can be defined as a systematic process of investigation to acquire new information in order to draw and validate inferences, hypotheses, observations, and conclusions in a little time period. It is flexible to adjust to the situation because it does not imply or recommend a standard set of methods to be applied in each case. The method vary from situation to situations and are determined by local conditions, local problems, and objectives at hand. As a methodology for agriculture development, RRA was developed for the quick field orientation result with the objectives as follows. Appraising agricultural and other needs for the rural community, prioritizing areas of research tailored to such needs, assessing feasibility of developmental needs and action plans, implementing action plans, monitoring and evaluating them. Participatory rural appraisal is a methodology for interacting with villagers, understanding them and learning from them. It involves a set of principles, a process of communication and a menu method for seeking the villagers' participation in putting forward their point of view to make use of such learning. It initiates a participatory process and seeks to sustain it. PRA is something known as participatory rapid appraisal, where the emphasis is on both participatory and rapid. The emphasis on rapid is more in terms of data collection, which is completed to conventional survey methods, which is compared to conventional survey method. 11.5 Conclusion. There are many unavailable lessons to learn from the participatory approach. However, it is extremely important to expect a magic wand kind of effect from this participatory approach. There is a danger of a participatory approach if somebody discriminately and without adequately theoretical training and historical awareness, becoming handy tools of doing micro level studies that do not connect with the macro world. This disengagement with the macro world has always important, but never as much as now in global milieu. It is more so that in the case of participatory approach, which appears to be rapid changing into a set of unquestioned techniques and losing ground with the epistemological assumptions upon which it throws. While its brazen critique of value neutrality is important, it is also important to care or hasty research entirely attached to the agenda and need of non-government organization and donor agencies. The significance of academic research cannot be overrated. The Western countries, the recognition for pure research exists, an imperative need for the sustenance of any democratic society. Not only in the emergence of new structure of civil society, though the institutions of non-government organization, that participatory approach advocates importance. So are the older forms of civic society involves like the social science development in universe. The reduction of the social research to tool participant and development programs would be disastrous both democracy and development. In this respect, Mukherjee advises participatory researchers need draw to discern at what level of change and development their research are pitched, problem solving largely at the symptomatic level or also reaching out to the systemic level. In the end, we can conclude that the crucial features of participatory research concerns the attitudes of researchers. This in turn determines the conceptualization and conduct of the research activity. In this sense, participatory research raises both professional and personal challenges that go beyond the issues of authorship and proper communications. Please do not forget reflections and 11.3. Reflections and 11.3. If the definition of participation is organized, our efforts to increase control over resources and regulative institutions in given social situations on the part of groups and movements of those hitherto excluded from such control. How many dimensions of participation would be like to over into your research in a participatory mode? One example of dimension is as a nuclear as an encounter between the two social sciences. The encounter between social classes, interest groups, and confrontations between local and metropolitan interest. Try to find out other similar dimensions. Further reading, Mukherjee, Parthanath 2000, Methodology in Social Research, Dilemmas and Perspectives, Sage Publications, India, Private Limited, New Delhi. So this is the end of the chapter 10.